Hey, it's Drybear. Just before 10.0.5 is set to release, we've seen some class balance tuning snuck into the patch that will be coming out on the 24th. Now, I've already covered the whole 10.0.5 patch notes. I'll leave a link to that down below in the description, and also have the rankings for the week coming out after, or I made them before I had actually made this video because it was so recent. So you can look at those DPS rankings and healer rankings and tank rankings to see why they've made these changes. But in this list of changes is some things that were desperately needed. Things like Frost Mage, Fire Mage, or Discipline Priest just severely underperforming. And we're going to see some nice changes come in here. So we're going to look at that today. As always, if you have any questions or comments for me, you'll find me live every day on twitch.tv/Drybear. Come by and say hi. And boom, here we are. Class tuning incoming for January 24th. And they've put a good note at the top here. In addition to class changes that are already part of the 10.0.5 patch, during the scheduled weekly maintenance on Tuesday, January 24th, we will make a number of tuning adjustments to specializations based on their performance in raid and M+ content to make sure that they are viable for the next half of the season. Starting with Balanced Druid, they fixed an issue where Cosmic Rapidity did not increase the frequency of shooting stars to occur based on the increased rate of Moonfire, Sunfire, Soul of Fire. Excellent. I didn't even know that was a bug, but glad that's fixed. Lunar Eclipse now increases the damage Starfire does to nearby enemies by 30% instead of 50%. So they're walking back this 10.0.5 buff. I guess they're just a little afraid that balance is already in the top 5, so they don't really want to give them even more. This was, I think, intended for them to be more of a cleave bonus, but yeah, so they say current tuning should still make Lunar Eclipse the ideal state for when you're dealing with multiple enemies at once. Cleave situation. But they maybe they're just a little worried that it's too much, especially given how well balance is doing right now. Restoration Druid, Verdancy healing reduced by 10%. Adaptive Swarm now increases the effectiveness of periodic effects by 20% instead of 25%. This really only affects Mythic Plus. It shouldn't have really any impact on raid. Sometimes Adaptive Swarm makes its way into raid, but it's very uncommon. Adaptive Swarm healing and damage reduced by 10%. And then Dream State now reduces cooldowns by up to 20 seconds while channeling Tranquility instead of 15. So Dream State and then Adaptive Swarm. This is mostly just targeting M+. Yeah, let's see. Primarily aimed at Restoration of Druid's Mythic Plus performance. Right, so this shouldn't have too much impact, if any at all, on Druid in Raid, but it should lower them a bit in Mythic Plus. Although I'm kind of curious as to why they're targeting Druids and not Preservation Evokers in this same manner, but you know, it is what it is. Mage, Fire Mage, and Frost Mage, all ability damage increased by 5%. In the DPS rankings that come out today on my channel, you'll see that in the Heroic Raid category, where people should be parsing really high, Fire and Frost Mage are doing the worst. So I think they're just not dealing enough damage for what they do. So we'll see if this is enough to help bump them up. Mistweaver Monk, Lesson of Despair, now increases critical strike while above 50% health instead of 80. This is the new Shadowlands gift modification in the talent tree that allows you to get more crit. I guess 80% was a little bit too much. So now when you're above half health, you'll get this benefit. This should just be a little bit more reasonable for them to be able to proc. Paladin, Holy Barrier Faith now accumulates 50% of effective Flash of Light and Holy Light healing, was 40%. This should help in almost all content, maybe less in Raid and more Mythic Plus, but it should be a nice benefit regardless. Priest, Discipline, easily the weakest healer in the game right now, just not doing enough healing, honestly, and they're aiming to fix that. Flash Heal healing increased by 25% in Raid and actually in Mythic Plus as well. Flash Heal is actually in your top 3, top 4 heals, which is different than past expansions. So 25% on Flash Heal is going to give you a lot more spot healing and make it more viable as an atonement spot, because you can throw out the Flash Shield, they get atonement, you can go back to dealing damage. Renew healing increased by 25%. Renew is also part of the Discipline kit this expansion, and getting more healing out of that was going to give you a lot more raid healing as well. And Powered Radiance healing increased by double. The fact that these three are just something that they just tossed in here goes to show how bad Discipline was. If they can just double one of their spells and then make 2 of their main abilities 25% stronger in hopes that it makes them better. So they were definitely... this is kind of just proof in the pudding. Ultimate Radiance increases the healing done by Power Radiance by 10% instead of 100%. They don't need to get this talent anymore because Radiance by itself is much, much better. Sins of the Many increases damage dealt by 40% instead of 30%. Divine Aegis creates a protective shield for 6% of critical healing done instead of 10%. This is probably more PvP than anything else, although I don't know if this was 100% needed, but there it is. Changes discipline are aimed at improving the spec's ability to react to burst damage, especially in dungeons. At the same time, we're tuning down a talent that's contributing more than intended to discipline's overall healing. Between these two changes and talent changes in 10.0.5, we expect discipline to be slightly more effective in raids and significantly more effective in dungeons. We shall see. Yeah, in raids, atonement is like 50 to 55% of your healing. So, and in dungeons, flash, heal, and renew contributes a significantly higher amount. So this does hit dungeon M+ discipline more than raid discipline. Rogue Outlaw, top of the charts. Combat stamina bonus reduced to 5% from 10%. Outlaw survivability and challenging content has been consistently higher than what we expected in 10. As a result, we were reducing combat stamina's bonus to a value more appropriate for its position and single point cost. Killing Spree, which is the new thing they got in the new patch, damage reduction value reduced from 65% to 35%. So I guess they're just a little bit worried about this being too much. So they're preemptively lowering it just to make sure it's not too high. Shaman, which basically every spec outside of enhancement has seen its struggles this season. Healing Surge, healing increased by 15%. This affects all specs, not just restoration. So this will help all specs heal a little bit more and have some off healing as well. Mana Spring now restores 400 mana at level 70. This is the totem they turned into a passive, and now it gives you just more mana than it did, which is super nice. Totemic Surge reduces the cooldown of totems by 3-6 seconds instead of 2-4. So Totemic Surge getting a nice buff. Elemental, which is in my latest rankings, is in like the bottom 5, bottom 6. They're not doing super great as of week 6. Flame Shock damage increased by 10% for Elemental only. Same thing for Chain Lightning, another 10%. Lava Beam 10%, Earthquake 10%. So all of their core abilities are getting 10% damage up. So we'll see if that helps them out a good bit. Healing Wave, healing increased by 6% for Restoration on top of the Healing Surge by 15%. Though granted, you only really use Healing Surge in Mythic Plus. You use it sometimes in emergencies for raid if the tank is dropping or you need to spot heal someone. But for the most part, you're using AoE heals and Healing Wave. Acid Rain damage increased again. This has been buffed like 3 times since the launch of the expansion. This is the one that makes your Healing Rain deal damage to everyone in the area. This is going to help a lot for Mythic Plus damage when you're pushing high keys. Flame Shock damage increased by 20% for Restoration only, so higher than Elemental, and then Lava Burst damage going up as well. Master of the Elements increased the effectiveness of the Shaman's next Nature, Physical, or Frost spell by 20% instead of 10%. These changes for both Elemental and Restoration are aimed at improving their capabilities in dungeon combat. We feel Restoration is lacking in reactive healing, yes, as well as damage contribution, yes. So we're increasing single target heals and a few damage abilities and talents. Good. That's good. Warlock, Affliction, Harvester of Souls damage increased by 25%. Affliction has seen many buffs over the last month or so. This is going to be another one of them. This won't have a crazy impact, but it is a nice change. Demonology, Reign of Tyranny causes Demonic Tyrant to deal 7% additional damage for each stack of Demonic Servitude active, and it was 5%. So Demonology is getting a buff. Demonology, they're getting a pretty big nerf coming into their burst damage. Their 3 AoEs are they're going to put each other on cooldown, which is going to be interesting to see how that works for their burst window. Overall, over time, it shouldn't affect raid, but it will affect PvP and Mythic Plus. And then we'll see just how they're trying to get Demonic Tyrant to be a little bit more valuable because of that. And we'll just see how that works out. Warrior Arms, more buffs. They're already getting some. This is going to be even more. Thunderclap damage increased by 30% for arms. Cleave damage increased by 5%. Whirlwind damage by 10%. Bladestorm damage by 5%. Rend initial damage increased by 15%. So when you apply Rend, the damage that you get there. So this is probably just for Mythic Plus, I would guess. AoE in dungeons and raids hasn't been so they just aren't doing super great in dungeons. It will help in AoE because Vault of the Incarnates has plenty AoE fights like Razageth or Council or Dathia, where there's a lot of situations where you need really good AoE. And I guess same thing goes for Fury, which they started the expansion and the initial start of the season 1 as one of the top 5 DPS, and they've just been dropping hard. And I'm now thinking that it might actually be because their set bonus sucks. Raging Blow and damage increased by 10%, Execute damage 15%, Rampage damage 10%, Annihilator damage 15%, Bloodthirst damage 10%, Bloodbath damage 5%. Despite taking the words right out of my mouth, despite a strong start to season 1, Fury's Permanent has fallen behind. They're down like the bottom third now. I'm still wondering if their set bonus isn't providing enough, but these are going to be some really nice changes for them. Protection Warrior, Brace for Impact now increases block value by 3% instead of 5. Brutal Vitality now causes 10% of the damage you deal to add to your Ignore Pain instead of 15%. And Shield Specialization now increases block value by 12% instead of 15%. I didn't think we were going to see a Prot Warrior nerf, but we got one. Currently dominating the tank populations, absolutely. Blood DKs as well. While we do want all tanks to feel powerful, all data and overall perceptions of tanks, but put Prot Warriors ahead of the pack by a lot. By the way, Blood DKs are pretty dang close to where Prot Warriors are right now as well. So we'll see where that goes from that. In addition to the buff notes and the 10.0.5 patch, during scheduled week in Manus, we will add a number of PvP changes. Gladiator's Distinction, the trinket set bonus, primary stat provided by the bonus is decreased by 40%. Stamina provided by the bonus increased by 35%. So less damage, more stamina. I think they just want people to die a little bit slower. Death Strike healing is no longer reduced in PvP combat, was reduced by 25%. Improved Death Strike's effectiveness is still reduced by 50% in PvP combat. Death Knights are still doing insanely good in PvP. And Enfeeble's enemy damage reduction against the Death Knight is now reduced by 33% in PvP. Rune of Spell Warding's Absorb Shield is now 33% effective. Rune of Spell Warding's cast speed reduction is now 33% effective. Unholy Necrotic Wound from Necrotic Wounds now absorbs 4% of healing done instead of 5%, and heals the Death Knight for up to 4% instead of 5%. So a little less survivability for Unholy on top of the base changes here. Virulent Plague no longer deals increased damage in PvP combat, was increased by 30%, so they're taking that out. Druid, Rake damage reduced by 18%, Rip damage reduced by 18%, Ferocious Bite damage reduced by 25% instead of 20%. So the bleed dots for Feral mostly are being dropped down. And then, I mean, you still will see some of this with like Resto Druid if you want to try to get some extra damage in there. But for the most part, it's only going to affect Feral. Ferocious Bite damage reduced by an additional 5%. Not huge. I like them having this. This is just the hardest one to deal with because bleeds can be a challenge to get rid of. So the damage ticking in PvP can be kind of a pain. Balance. Orbit Breaker now resets its count when entering an arena match. Full Moon damage reduced to 60%, was 80%. Wrath deals 50% increased damage in PvP. Starfire deals 50% increased damage instead of 20%. Star Surge deals 40% increased damage instead of 20%. So a lot of balance buffs for PvP. And again, balance is in a tough spot just because they need to be threatening enough to be able to burst someone or cause serious damage. If they don't deal that damage effectively, then you probably would be better off running a different caster. So they need to do enough damage, and they're kind of increasing that overall. So, I mean, these are their core spells. Star Surge going up is a big one. New Moon, Half Moon, and Full Moon deal 20% increased damage in PvP. Gathering Star Stuff is the 2-set bonus. Grants 15% increased damage instead of 20%, and then 20% increased damage instead of 35%. So they're nerfing the set bonus and buffing the base kit so that you can... I'm not sure how the math works out here. Hopefully it's a nice buff overall. Feral Frenzy damage for Feral, reduced by 10%. Frenzy Regeneration Healing, reduced by 50%, up from 38%. So less healing for Feral Druids. And Restoration, Frenzy Regeneration Healing, reduced by 50%, up from 38% for Feral and Restoration only. And then Budding Leaves is now 50% effective in PvP combat instead of 70%. So Resto Druid and Feral Druid nerfs. I think this is a balanced buff for PvP, but we'll see how that works out. Evoker Devastation, Deep Breath deals 20% increased damage in PvP instead of 40%. So damage coming down. Spellweaver's Dominance grants 20% increased crit instead of 30%. Disintegrate deals 20% increased damage instead of 15%. And then Azure Strike deals 20% increased damage in PvP. So they're rebalancing some of this just to kind of reduce some of the potential and then maybe rebalance it. Like Azure Strike maybe is a nice thing when you're moving or when you're under pressure. but bringing deep breath down means that the burst potential comes down a good bit. Preservation, Dream Projection, Heal over time effect can now be dispelled. And it costs 4% mana. Wow. Okay, well, yeah. So you can now purge it. Interesting. That'll be interesting. See how that works. Hunter, Roar of Sacrifice now deals 10% of damage to the target suffers to the pet instead of 20%. A little bit damage down on Hunter pets, which is nice. It gives, they basically, yeah, so they're going to help keep the pets alive, which is always a challenge for hunters in PvP. Mistweaver in PvP, or sorry, Arcane Mage in PvP. Arcane Bombardment is now 40% effective instead of 65%. So some of that Arcane Burst coming down. Mistweaver PvP, mana regeneration now decreased by 10%, so they're getting some mana regeneration back. It was decreased by more. They're easing that back a little bit. Enveloping Mist healing increased by 25% in PvP combat. This can obviously, unlike Resto Druid, where you have a lot of hots, Mistweaver has fewer hots that can be dispelled. So in PvP, it can become a problem if they're not healing enough. And then Chrysalis reverted a previous change, now reduces the cooldown of Life Cocoon by 45 seconds. They did this because there's a core change in 10.0.5 that there's a new talent that reduces the cooldown of Life Cocoon, and then they wanted to adjust Chrysalis in PvP so you can double reduce it, but I guess they're rolling that back. I still think that Life Cocoon doesn't stack up to some other healers' cooldowns, so I think it should be strong in the right situations, but hopefully in PvP it doesn't get too problematic overall. Paladin, these are some big changes here. Paladin, Divine Protection now reduces the damage by 30% while in PvP combat instead of 20%. Flash of Light healing increased by 15%. Aura of Reckoning max aura stacks raised to 100 instead of 50. And Consecration's damage increased by 50% in PvP combat. For Holy, the Reckoning PvP talent now increases the damage of your next judgment by 25% instead of 100%. Oh, that's a big change. Holy Light now heals for 75% more in PvP combat instead of 40%. Holy Shock healing increased by 15% in PvP combat. There's some cool Holy Paladin PvP talents that work with Holy Light. So this should be interesting to see if you get to cast that basically all the time over Flash of Light. Yeah, fixed an issue that caused the judgment from Reckoning to not always critically strike. Nice little fix there. Retribution, they've been doing real good ever since they got those big buffs, and I guess they're going to get some adjustments because of it. Final Reckoning damage reduced by 20% in PvP combat. This is in addition to the last balance tuning that they got that raised Final Reckoning up, so they just trying to make sure that doesn't impact PvP as much as it did. I've seen some big ret numbers since the buff, so they're trying to roll that back. Radiant Decree damage reduced by 33% in PvP combat. Paladin Retribution class 2 set bonus now increases the damage of Judgment, Blade of Justice, and Wake of Ashes by 10% instead of 15%. So a nerf there. Crusader Strike now deals 80% increased damage in PvP combat instead of 30%. Healing Hands now 75% or 70% effective instead of 50%. A little bit more healing out of that. Templar's Verdict damage increased by 10%. Final Verdict damage increased by 10% in PvP. Exorcism damage increased by 80% in PvP, and then Lawbringer now deals up to 8% of enemies' maximum health instead of 10%. So they're just trying to make sure that crazy burst opportunity isn't really there, and they're trying to balance it out for more consistent damage. And I guess we'll see how that works out. Shaman, Earth Unleashed from Unleashed Shield now breaks on damage and lasts 2 seconds instead of 4 seconds. Healing Stream Totem, healing is increased by 30% in PvP combat instead of 38, so getting nerfed on the Healing Stream Totem. Restoration, Water Shield now returns 1% mana when struck by a melee attack instead of 2%, so mana regen coming down. Stormkeeper's damage increased is now 67% effective in PvP for Resto only. And remember, they are getting the balance changes above. They're making their lava blast and a lava burst, things like that, stronger. So maybe they're just trying to get rid of the burst potential for Resto Shaman. Riptide healing increased by 10% instead of 15%, so a nerf there. So mana regen getting nerfed, healing stream getting nerfed, Riptide getting nerfed, Stormkeeper getting nerfed for Resto. And then Elemental, the 2-set bonus has been reduced by 50%. Primordial Surge's Lava Burst damage increased is now 60% in PvP combat, so a nerf there. So overall, just some changes to the Shaman lands. Warrior, Thunderous Roar, bleed damage no longer deals reduced damage in PvP. So Thunderous Roar getting better, 50% better. Uproar, or 100% better. Uproar talent no longer has a reduced cooldown effect in PvP. It was 50% nerfed. Fury, Slaughterhouse PvP talent now lasts 16 seconds instead of 12 seconds. Storm of Steel no longer has a reduced damage effect. Damage reduction effect in PvP. So, Fury War is getting a nice little bonus there in PvP. So, there you go. Those are the changes. It's a pretty big list. Some very, very needed changes here that were obvious problems that weren't being addressed. So, hopefully this is enough for it to work out. Let me know what your thoughts are down below. As always, if you have any questions or comments for me, you'll find me live every single day on twitch.tv/Drybear. Come by and say hi. If you enjoyed yourself today, leave a like down below. You can support me and my work on Patreon and view Patreon exclusive content, link in the description. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll see you in the next one.